Hello, everybody. My name is Jim, and this idea sprouted from a Bookish Discoveries video that I didn't upload because I kept falling into rants about the who's, what's, where's, when's, why's, and how's of different stories. This just kind of manifested itself, and it's a good way to combine and note what my pet peeves are as a reader and what I consider when I write. Note that this is only my opinion. Where I may have pet peeves, there are contexts in which they work. However, I'm going to talk about when they don't work, and I will do my best to provide examples of each. So sit back, leave a like, and listen to 5 reasons actions suck in books, in my opinion. We're going to start fairly simple with this one. The quickest example I can pull is from a book I'm currently reading where I ran across the phrase, nodded his agreement. It's a redundancy. There are many instances during which someone may nod, but given the context, we may already know what the nod means. If a character nods in response to a comment, more often than not, there's no reason to elaborate further that he agreed. Similarly, you have situations where someone stood up. For example, if the character was in a seated position before, of course they stood up. So to avoid that redundancy, stood would be enough. It was tough for me to think of exact examples from books because I think the example I hear all the time is of a small child picking up a heavy sword and swinging it effortlessly. I haven't run across that yet because I don't read fantasy, but it's true. That's a good example. Unrealistic actions cause the reader to ask how, but given the context of the action, say the child has superhuman strength despite lacking muscles, it could work. But as a reader, I would definitely need to know that about the child beforehand. Otherwise, it'd come across as a convenience. One example I can recall, and I may have to use this book as an example a number of times if this becomes a series, is when a main character, usually, sometimes it's a side character, but in this instance, it was the main character, who had no prior knowledge of how to use a bow and arrow, hit target after target after target during a competition. My guess is that it was to continue to show how perfect he was at everything and that he was a quick study because he was praised by his real archer companion. There was a character in the story who was an archer who was capable of doing this sort of thing, but no, the main character was able to do just as well, even though he had absolutely no practice. It just came across as unrealistic to me. It made me roll my eyes. There are so many factors at play with archery. Vision, how far to stretch the bow, because that determines, the arc and the distance in which the arrow travels. A steady hand, not to mention if the target is moving or not. In the case of the story, the target was, or if it's day or night. And I do believe that in this story, there was very little light. It was pretty dark. Someone with zero skill holding a bow and arrow wouldn't have it that easy, especially under duress. Someone who has skill with a bow and arrow wouldn't have it so easy. They would be stressed out. They could be scared and shaking. They wouldn't have that same amount of focus that they would have if they were just in a field shooting stationary targets. So it just didn't make sense. It was all about setting up this character to be perfect, and it just made him annoying. Sometimes I wonder how a character can see what's happening behind them. I feel much more immersed as a reader if I am in a character's perspective and can adopt their senses at any moment. I'm taken out of that experience if the character suddenly knows exactly what's going on outside a closed door or correctly interprets the meaning behind another character's dialogue. This is a tough one, though, for me to follow personally. I have to go back into my chapters every once in a while to revise some of my paragraphs because the characters at times do become too all knowing, and I do not write from that omniscient perspective. And I think part of the problem is that I do know all of my characters' intentions. I know them like I know the back of my hand, but I have to work to make sure you know it too without giving it away by suddenly jumping into an omniscient perspective. Now, obviously, if you're reading or writing a story completely through the eyes of an omniscient narrator, then this doesn't matter. That is a thing. So, if you're reading a story where you can see everything that's going on and you head hop a little bit between characters and you know exactly what everybody's feeling in one chapter, then, that's fine. That is a style. I just prefer to read and write limited perspectives. I feel that's a bit more immersive. So if that's the case, omniscience isn't a good thing. If this sort of video is well received, I do have one in mind for dialogue. So just consider this pet peeve an extension to that video when it comes out. But this one has to do with too much action that occurs between a single dialogue sequence. Now, this one's also a bit tricky because a number of authors, including myself, would recommend that fellow authors provide some movement during dialogue so that the characters don't seem like sentient mannequins to the reader. But there is a way to provide too much. So just for example, I've written one down. Let's say a character begins their dialogue. Yada yada, she said, walking toward the open window. The breeze brushed her hair across her cheeks as she smelled the yellow tulips from the garden below, still dewy from the rainstorm an hour ago and dusted by a black Chevy driving along the dirt road, honking its horn at a wandering deer. You see where I'm going? It's that sort of thing that I just have to skip. Just tell me what you have to say, ma'am. I don't care about your soggy tulips. A number of author tubers will tell you that verbs like walk are weak, and for the most part, I agree with that statement. There are stronger verbs that add more personality to the characters on the page, but by itself, walk isn't a major pet peeve of mine as a reader and as a writer, because again, depending on the context, the story may not be about the action. So if I don't want to draw attention to it, or if I've already defined the style of walk, I might just use a weaker verb. And it's not just walk, it could be other things as well, but walk is the verb that's most frequently used when talking about this sort of thing. But repetition becomes an issue in cases like this where authors try too hard to stylize a character's walk. So they just use one, quote, stronger verb over and over again. And just, going back to the book with the suddenly skilled archer, the word trudge was used so many times in place of walk to where if I see trudge written in any book now, even if it's just one time, I groan. It's a word that I struggle to use in my own writing, even though it's stronger than walk, because this author used it so many times as a replacement that it became walk. It became that story's walk. It lost its power. It never added to any of the characters' personalities after the first handful of times it was used. And one of the things that same novel lacked was a sense of setting. And as a reader, I would like to at least have enough to be able to fill in the blanks for where I am. There are times as an author that you can use moving from point A to point B to create atmosphere and define your setting. Perhaps a character is passing through a corridor to reach an arena where he's going to duel someone. It's a life or death situation. Is he nervous? Are there cells that line the corridor with other fighters pushing him forward? Was he attacked by a stink cloud farted out by the guard in front of him? And, what does he see when he exits? At no point do you necessarily have to say that he's walking or trudging to imply that he's moving or has moved, and at the same time, we, the readers, have a better idea of his surroundings and feelings. So, yes, walk is generally considered weak, but it feels just as lazy to use the same strong verb too often in the same story, especially when a character's perspective could give you so much more information about what's around them that has nothing to do with their movement. But that's it. I know other booktubers and author tubers have top 5 lists like this, but I thought this would be a cool way to tie my reading and writing preferences together. Let me know if you want this to become a series and if you want me to talk about specific topics. Also, whether you're an author or a reader, let me know if you agree with any of this. Elaborate on some points if you want to. Again, this is all just my opinion, and context often changes everything. Otherwise, I've been Jim. You've been great. Happy reading and happy writing.